So, Italy fought in World War I. They were on the winning side, which is usually a good thing for a country. You expect parades, prosperity, maybe some new territory to put on the map. Instead, when Italy showed up to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, they got the international equivalent of a pat on the head and a voucher for a free dessert. All those secret promises Britain and France made in the Treaty of London to get Italy into the war? Suddenly, nobody's phone was working. The promised lands in Dalmatia and Africa evaporated. The poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, a man with an ego so large it needed its own zip code, coined the perfect term for it: Vittoria mutilata, the mutilated victory. 500,000 dead soldiers, a wrecked economy, and all they got was a "thanks for coming out." This national humiliation created a political vacuum filled with rage, confusion, and a desperate craving for someone, anyone, to make Italy feel important again. The stage was perfectly set for a drama no one really wanted. Enter Benito Mussolini. Before he was the chin-jutting dictator, he was a political chameleon. He started his career as a fire-breathing socialist journalist, editing the party newspaper Avanti. He wrote passionately about international proletarian revolution, all the standard stuff. Then World War I broke out, and Mussolini performed a political pirouette so fast it's amazing he didn't fly into orbit. Suddenly, internationalism was out, and fervent, aggressive nationalism was in. His socialist comrades, understandably confused by this complete reversal of his entire personality, promptly kicked him out of the party. Undeterred, he started a new paper, funded by French business interests and Italian industrialists who found his new pro-war stance much more agreeable. For a few years, his fascist movement was a joke, a tiny collection of angry veterans and weirdos that got completely crushed in the 1919 election. He was a failed politician looking for a crisis to exploit. And Italy, ever the helpful basket case, was about to deliver the biggest crisis he could have dreamed of. The years 1919 and 1920 in Italy are known as the Biennio Rosso, the 2 red years. This wasn't just a couple of protests, this was full-blown chaos. Workers, inspired by the Russian Revolution, started seizing control of factories. In Turin, they raised red flags over Fiat plants. Out in the countryside, landless peasants occupied the estates of wealthy landowners. The liberal government in Rome seemed completely paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch. Now, for the industrialists, the landowners, and the comfortable middle class, this looked like the apocalypse. They were terrified. They saw the Bolsheviks at their gates. What they needed was a hero, someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty and restore order. The chaos wasn't strong enough to cause a revolution, but it was just perfect for creating the fear necessary for a counter-revolution. Mussolini and his tiny fascist movement saw their opening. They weren't selling a complex political ideology, they were selling a simple, brutal product: security. Mussolini's answer to the Red Fear was the squadristi, the black shirts. These weren't just street thugs, they were organized paramilitary squads, funded by the same industrialists and landowners who were terrified of socialism. Their job was simple: violence. They would descend on towns in trucks, armed with clubs and guns, to break up strikes and burn down union halls. They had a particularly nasty signature move: forcing their political opponents, socialists, communists, trade unionists, to drink huge quantities of castor oil. It was a brutally effective tool of humiliation and political control, designed to break the spirit as much as the body. Local fascist bosses, known as the Ross, carved out their own little fiefdoms through sheer terror. The police and army often just stood by and watched, either because they sympathized with the fascists or were ordered not to intervene. This wasn't a fight for ideas in a debating hall. It was a war for control of the streets, and only one side was really fighting it. By October 1922, Mussolini felt bold. He announced a March on Rome, which sounds very dramatic and revolutionary. In reality, it was one of history's greatest bluffs. A few tens of thousands of poorly armed black shirts gathered outside the city, looking more like a disgruntled camping trip than an invading army. The Italian military could have scattered them with a single volley of machine gun fire. The Prime Minister even drafted a decree for martial law. All it needed was a signature from the King, Victor Emmanuel III. And the King hesitated. He was a small, indecisive man, terrified of a civil war and deeply distrustful of the existing political class. He worried the army might not be loyal. He worried his more dashing cousin might be a better choice for king. So, instead of signing the decree, he folded. He called Mussolini, who was waiting safely in Milan, and invited him to come to Rome and form a government. Mussolini took a comfortable overnight train to his conquest of the city. It was less of a march, more of a commute. So, Mussolini is prime minister, but he's not a dictator yet. His first cabinet was a coalition. He had to play nice with other parties. Democracy was wounded, but not dead. Mussolini's next move was a piece of cynical genius called the Acerbo Law, passed in 1923. The law was simple. Whichever party got the most votes in an election, as long as it was over 25%, would automatically be given 2/3 of the seats in parliament. It was like a winner-take-all game show, but for running a country. It was pitched as a way to create stable government after years of chaos. Of course, in the 1924 election, surrounded by black shirt intimidation and violence, Mussolini's party won a huge victory. Thanks to the Acerbo Law, they now had a supermajority. They had used the rules of democracy to legally dismantle democracy from the inside. It was a quiet coup done with paperwork instead of guns. With his new supermajority, Mussolini seemed invincible. But then one man decided to speak up. His name was Giacomo Matteotti, the leader of the Socialist Party. On May 30, 1924, he stood up in Parliament and gave a blistering 2-hour speech, calmly and meticulously detailing all the violence, intimidation, and fraud the fascists had used to win the election. It was an act of incredible bravery. As he finished, he reportedly told his colleagues, "Now you can prepare my funeral oration." 11 days later, he was kidnapped in broad daylight in the middle of Rome by fascist thugs. He was bundled into a car and murdered. This wasn't just another street brawl. This was the assassination of the leader of the opposition. The country was thrown into crisis. The non-fascist politicians walked out of Parliament in protest, the Aventine secession, hoping the king would finally step in and dismiss Mussolini. They waited and waited. The king, once again, did absolutely nothing. The Matteotti murder almost destroyed Mussolini. His government was teetering on the edge of collapse. For months, he seemed weak and indecisive. Then, on January 3, 1925, he walked into Parliament and gave the speech that would define his regime. Instead of denying his involvement or promising an investigation, he did the opposite. He dared them. He took full moral, political, and historical responsibility for everything that had happened. "If fascism has been a criminal association," he thundered, "then I am the chief of this criminal association." It was an astonishing gamble. He was calling their bluff. He effectively told the opposition and the king, "I am the state. I am the violence. Stop me if you can." Nobody could, or nobody would. Within 48 hours, his opponents were being arrested, their newspapers shut down. This was the point of no return. The mask of parliamentary democracy was dropped, revealing the snarling face of an open, unapologetic dictatorship. The slow-motion coup was finally over. With all opposition crushed, Mussolini could finally build his fascist state. This meant propaganda. Propaganda and more propaganda. He was Il Duce, the leader, a new Caesar rebuilding Rome's glory. School children chanted, "Mussolini is always right." His face was everywhere. He peddled the idea of the corporate state, a supposed third way between capitalism and communism, where everyone worked together for the nation's glory. In reality, it just meant strikes were illegal and bosses had all the power. He even managed to solve the Roman question, the long-standing dispute between the Italian state and the papacy. The 1929 Lateran Treaty created Vatican City, and in return, the Pope gave Mussolini's regime his blessing. It was a public relations masterpiece. The trains might not have actually run on time, but by controlling information and crushing dissent, he made sure everyone thought they did. Italy had its order, purchased at the low, low price of freedom, liberty, and a functioning moral compass. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!